countrywide on RTE Radio 1. Sponsored by Cara Gas, celebrating 80 years, bringing energy to Ireland's homes and businesses.
This week, the Environmental Protection Agency published a report showing that Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions increased by 3.5% in 2016, with emissions from transport, energy and agriculture all increasing in that time. Emer Cotter of the EPA.
It's really down to how we view this as a society. Are we all taking this serious enough? Are we actually doing what we can do on an individual basis to move away from fossil fuels, to make those small changes in our lives, and then scaling that up to see that we back up what's in our National Mitigation Plan with investment and with action?
Then on Wednesday, the EU Agriculture Commissioner Phil Hogan published his CAP reform proposals with a strong emphasis on making farming more accountable when it comes to climate action commitments.
Because of our recent international agreements that we've signed up to in 2015 on sustainable development goals and the COP21 on climate, we have to do more, and every sector has to do more in terms of meeting our climate obligations and our environmental standards. The common agricultural policy will be framed in such a way that our farmers will be expected to play their part, and payments will be linked in a conditional way to doing more on the environment.
Meanwhile, on Monday next, back in Dublin, the government will give an update on their Foodwise 2025 strategy, which strives to increase livestock production to achieve increased exports by 2025. There is an argument made that as demand for food increases globally, Ireland is the most environmentally friendly of all food-producing nations to meet demand in a sustainable manner. Here's Dr. Shane Bergen, physicist and associate professor in the School of Education at UCD, speaking on Today with Sean O'Rourke yesterday.
We produce food in a way that very few other countries can do. We can grow grass all year, and that means we can grow crops and we can produce meat in a way that other countries would be enviable of. That said, agriculture does contribute to climate change. So cows burp and gases are given off in various other ways you consider with transport of food and so on. And so there is an impact on the environment from climate change. And so the Citizens' Assembly recently has said we need to start thinking about the effects of our farming on our environment. But this is a complex issue. Should Ireland be allowed to continue to produce meat and grow vegetables, whilst other countries may reduce their agricultural output, with the idea being that we're able to do it in a more sustainable and in a more environmentally friendly way?
So is it compatible to achieve the environmental demands of Phil Hogan's new CAP 2020 reforms while also meeting the targets of the Irish Government's Foodwise 2025, while also adhering to the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly and meeting our international commitments in relation to climate change? Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is Joe Healy, the President of the Irish Farmers Association, who's in our Galway studio, and Cara Agustenborg of European Friends of the Earth, who joins me here in Dublin. Joe, I'll go to you first. Doesn't the figures published by the EPA this week, it just proves that agriculture is paying lip service to climate change? You pretend the industry is playing its part when really the figures show you're not.
I think that's unfair on agriculture. Look, I want to say at the outset, there's more everyone can do, and we're very interested in doing more. We've already spoken to Eamon Ryan about having a meeting with them. I'd appreciate to even sit down in the future with Cara, etc. But I think, the figures showed that from the EPA that there was a 3.5% increase across the board. But within that, agriculture was the smallest increase of 2.7%, transport at 3.5%, and energy was up 6%. Over since 1990, agriculture has increased our output by 40%, while reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 6%. Now, in that same time, transport has increased by over 139,000%, and I don't hear of calls to take cars off the road. So,
well, we are going that way with electric cars, for example, with hybrid cars.
Yeah, and look, as I said at the outset, there is more that we can all do, and that includes government policy as well. For example, the smart farming initiative that IFA are running in conjunction with the EPA has shown that it can be a win-win situation with farmers by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time increasing our profits.
Okay, we featured that on the programme a few weeks ago, and Cara, you actually heard that report we did with farmer Andrew McHugh up in County Longford. But just back to you, Cara, isn't that a fair point that Joe makes there? despite the fact that milk quotas, for example, have disappeared, cow numbers have increased exponentially over the last number of years, that it is still quite a proportionately low increase in agriculture?
Look, any increase right now in any sector is absolutely against what we need to do for climate action. So our government has set forth an objective to reduce emissions by 5% per year, starting several decades ago, and it hasn't happened. And while, yes, what's happening with transport is absolutely shocking, Joe works in the farming sector. The farming sector needs to do their fair share too, and they're not. So any increase right now is not acceptable.
But, demand for food globally is increasing, and we're meeting that demand.
We are meeting demand for a middle-class product, mainly for mothers in China who prefer not to breastfeed but bottle feed. We're not actually contributing to food security, and if we want to contribute to food security, we need to think about getting out of animal agriculture, because we know that's a very inefficient way of producing calories.
Well, the point I made to you a few weeks ago when we discussed this, shouldn't your argument be aimed at consumers and not farmers? They're in the supply and demand business.
I think it needs to be aimed at both, but unfortunately we have a government policy right now which favours this idea of sustainable intensification of beef and dairy. Less than 1% of our farmers are growing vegetables. We know Ireland has a good climate for growing vegetables, and we also know that with a changing climate it's getting harder and harder to go with beef and dairy. I mean, we have a fodder crisis right now at the moment. And why isn't the Irish Farmers Association looking at diversification of their farming system? I mean, it is a broken system where farmers are not making enough money, and nobody is talking about how to change the system, not only to improve the environment, but also to improve farmers' income and rural economy.
OK, that point, Joe Healy, in relation to afforestation, for example, we have the lowest cover in Europe, and yet we have beef farmers who are making no money from the marketplace. Why can't we change the systems?
We had a meeting last night in Claremorris, and Adam Woods, I think it was, from the Journal, that put up a slide of a picture taken in Kerry of lovely green fields, people, the environment looking lively, houses there. Then he put up another slide of, I'm pro-forestry. I think there's a lot that forestry can be done, but there are three legs to the sustainability. There's economic, environment and social. We don't want a whole countryside devoid of people, with people living in urban areas. But, a lot has been mentioned about the growth in demand for protein products. We in IFA, we look at climate change as a global issue, not just an Irish issue. The number of people, the number of middle-class people in the world are growing. We're up to 7 billion people, estimated to go to 9 billion by 2050. There's, as I said, a growing demand for protein products. Ireland is the most efficient producers of dairy products in the world. We're fourth or fifth most efficient producers of beef in Europe, and both of those are from a greenhouse gas point of view. If we don't produce the dairy products, it'll be produced in countries that aren't nearly as efficient as us. And I can't understand the argument where they say move that production from Ireland, it'll only be taken up by the likes of Brazil. And I think it's important, Damien, to point out that Brazil, we are 4 times more efficient from a carbon point of view at producing beef than Brazil.
Let's talk about efficiency, because in April the EU Parliament put out a report that said Ireland is the least efficient in terms of carbon per euro of output. So we are not efficient in that sense. I mean, if you talk about money being the be-all and end-all, we are not efficient when it comes to the euro output that we produce for the carbon we produce. We're highly intensive.
But we're grass-based compared to maybe other countries which are far more intensive, which have far bigger feedlots, where animal welfare is probably not as looked after as well as it is in Ireland.
I mean, we shouldn't. We're comparing ourselves to Brazil and Argentina. We cannot compete, particularly in the beef sector, with Brazil and Argentina. We can't compete. We shouldn't be looking at trying to compete with these large scale.
They'll just slurp up what we reduce.
Which is, okay.
That's the point that's been made.
And we make that point repeatedly, and that is exactly why we are in the situation of an urgent climate crisis right now, because every country goes, well, there's no point in us doing anything because other countries aren't. We can't, Brazil, all of these other countries, they have signed on to the Paris Agreement. We have to assume that they also will do what it takes to address climate change, and we have to do what it takes to address climate change here at home too.
Okay, Joe Healy, on the issue of Foodwise 2025, and there's a big event in Croke Park, I believe, on Monday, and the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has written a full page about this in the Farmers Journal this week. The maths the simple maths or the physics of it, or the whatever you want to call. How can you meet your climate change targets on the one hand and at the same time increase livestock production?
Can I just go back there in relation to what Cara is saying about we cannot compete with Brazil and Argentina? We talk about carbon produced per kilo of dairy product or kilo of beef produced. And we're 4 times more efficient than Brazil or Argentina. So I'm not rightly sure what point she's making there.
We're trying to compete economically with very large-scale beef producers.
I'm on here
when
this
we
morning,
know that
Cara,
beef is not profitable in Ireland.
I didn't interrupt you. We're on here talking this morning not about the euro output. We're talking about kilo of protein product output, and the fact remains that if we don't produce it, it's the likes of Brazil and Argentina that will take up the slack. And I thought, I would expect you to be on our side in this, because we're better off producing that product in the most efficient from a carbon point of view countries.
Okay.
And Ireland is that. Damien, back
Now,
to your point in relation to Foodwise 2025. I've already stated at the start that we have, while increasing our output by 40% since 1990, we have reduced our carbon emissions by 6%. That proves that with the work of science, with the work of genetics and the work that the likes of Teagasc are doing, that our animals can become more efficient, and that's where we want to go. That's what we need to be doing to improve the efficiencies and the genetics and the science, and that will reduce our carbon output while increasing our
that's all fabulous work, and it's great that we are trying to become more efficient.
But are you saying that now? You're not sarcastic saying that, are you?
No.
Do you recognise that there is work going on?
I think Teagasc is doing state-of-the-art research. I did my PhD at Teagasc, so absolutely, I know the work they're doing is great on efficiency. However, we can't be increasing the number of cows by 300,000 and also reducing total emissions. So, we have to do both. We have to look at both issues.
So Brexit is...
Damien,
yes.
The big question here is... And I've said it a few times, it's well established that Ireland is the most efficient producers of dairy product in the world from a carbon point of view. The demand for the dairy product protein is growing in the world. If it's not produced in Ireland,
you've made that point.
Yes, but it's a point that doesn't appear to be.
I think it's taken up quite a lot of our discussion.
Let's go back to the science. The atmosphere does not care about our efficiency. The atmosphere cares about total carbon in the atmosphere. So we need to get our total carbon down, and every country needs to do that, including us. We can't be saying just because Brazil and Argentina do it worse that doesn't exempt us from reducing total emissions.
That's why we continue to support Teagasc. We continue to ensure that Teagasc are well enough funded and with resources to ensure that they continue to work on the science and the genetics. That's why we have the smart farm.
Get our total carbon down.
Yes, I agree with you, and that's why we have a very good initiative that Damien has referred to already, the smart farming initiative that shows it's a win-win.
You made the initial reference to that. Okay, you were the first point, Joe. You were the final point, Cara.
We're really welcoming the EU CAP reforms that are going to encourage small farmers and going to encourage more looking at environmental benefits, not just food production. But, Ireland is at risk. If we don't start getting our farming lower carbon, then we won't be able to avail of these reforms.
And our energy and our industry and our transport as well.
Absolutely. It all needs to come down. No, absolutely
not. And agriculture gets proportionately, I suppose, pinpointed more than others in this country because it is still our largest indigenous industry, whereas in other European countries it's not. So
they all need to be held accountable. Absolutely.
Okay, Joe Healy, President of the IFA. I know there are other issues with regards to CAP and Brexit, which I think we'll come back and talk to you about in a few weeks' time because they are continuing and they are very important as well. But thank you very much, Joe Healy, President of the IFA, for going into our Galway studio, and Cara Agustenborg, who is Chairman of the European Friends of the Earth platform. Thank you very much, as always, for joining us on the programme today.